Mr. Larry.
You're welcome.
That's a great way to start, isn't it? Just hear a little flute music. Good to see everybody. You know what else we want to do to start? We want to stretch. And that will help be like those red wigglers, right? It's kind of like fertilizer for your brain and your body. Everything works better. So let's do it by telling our story. You know, the story's in a sequence of movements that's really good for your body. There's a reason why each movement follows the next. And it's really handy that there's a story to help us remember it, right? If you didn't have the story, you could just do the movements and they would make you feel better just because of the ways that they stretch you and help your body and your brain to work better. So it's like body-brain fertilizer, this wonderful stretching. So let's do it by telling the story, okay? Here we go. Everybody stand up, bring your hands to your heart. And here we go. One morning, when the sun was coming up, why, there was a cat who was stretching alongside a wide river. She looked up at the sun, and then she arched her back and stretched like cats do. Oh, it feels so good. She did it again. She breathed in, and then she was breathing out, pressing and stretching, arching her back. Oh, feels so good. Then she looked across the river and she saw her friend the dog. And he said, I'm going to stretch too. And so he stretched like dogs stretch. Oh, breathing in and out, in and out. Good. Then he sat down and the two friends looked down the river. And what did they see coming down to the river? What was it? It was an empty boat. That's right. They saw an empty boat floating down the river. That boat was just rocking back. It was weird. No one was in it, right? Just rocking back and forth on a nice sunny day. But then a big dark cloud came and the wind started to blow. And that boat rocked back and forth until finally it crashed onto the riverbank. Well, up in a tree, in a big, tall tree. Way up in the tree, there was an eagle. And the eagle could see everything. So high up in the tree, that eagle could see that there was a crocodile sleeping on the riverbank close to the dog. And the eagle said, I better fly down and warn that dog because a crocodile might eat him. And so he flew to warn the dog. And sure enough, the crocodile who was sleeping on the riverbank, sound asleep, breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. That crocodile started to wake up, and he was getting ready to eat the dog. Roar! Well, the dog said, you're not going to eat me, watch this, and he stretched. He jumped between his paws. He folded over like a piece of paper, stood up, and turned into a person. Yeah, special sound for a person, right? And so he pulled the boat off of the riverbank into the river, got in the boat, and that's how he got away from the toothy jaws of that hungry crocodile. Bye, crocodile. Not gonna eat me. But the crocodile looked across across the river and saw that cat. And the crocodile said, I'm going to eat that cat. And the cat said, oh no, I saw my friend the dog. I know what to do. And she stretched like cats stretch. And then she turned into a dog. She jumped between her paws, folded over like a piece of paper, and stood up and turned into a person. And her friend in the boat said, get in the boat with me, get in the boat with me, come on. She got in the boat, and that's how they got away from the toothy jaws of the hungry crocodile. Bye, Mr. Crocodile. Bye-bye. Yeah. All right. So that's our story so far, right? And when you think about it, there are special meanings in this story. I mean, it's a fun story and it's got a purpose of helping us to stretch and feel better. But if we think a little bit more about the story, we might see more of a meaning. So the eagle that's way up in the tree and can see everything could be a symbol, something that represents wisdom, right? Where you can see and understand a lot of things, right? And so the eagle is sort of a symbol of truth and wisdom and understanding. And he is coming to help the dog by warning the dog, right? And wisdom and understanding can help us in life, right? Can help us to know what to do when we have problems to solve or any kind of trouble to overcome. So in this case, the dog knew how to stretch, and it's kind of like a fantasy, right? Because he turned into a person. And that's really just a symbol of how stretching and keeping a routine and keeping yourself healthy can help you to get through hard times, right? So let's talk about Will Allen. He has a wonderful story. And there are some things that we can kind of guess about his life as we read this story of his life. It's a biography, right? So it is a true story. It tells us about how he lived as a child and who he became as a man and what he did. So it's a sequential story through time. That's biographies are a lot like that, aren't they? Kind of like the Siberian tiger, where we started out with the tiger when he was first born and what happened in his life, right? It told the story of the tiger's life. But this is about the person, Will Allen, a person that grew up on a farm in Maryland and really probably worked hard. You know, they said that he got tired of picking and planting when he got a little bit older, and he really wanted to move and do something else, right? He wanted to get off the farm. So that tells you he probably was working really hard. What's funny is he ultimately came back to the farm, didn't he? You know what? That's what happened with my dad. My dad was also a farmer. And I'm going to put this on because I'm a little bit chilly. And he grew up on a farm and he worked really hard on the farm and he wanted to get off the farm. He didn't want to do that anymore. And so he studied very hard. Eventually, he was able to go to medical school and become a doctor. But guess what? Later, he wanted to buy something more than anything else. And you know what it was? It was a farm. He wanted to go back to the farm. And that's where he lived at the end of his life. He wanted to live on a farm. So the same thing happened with Will in a way, right? Then, but the story was so interesting about how they didn't have a TV or a car, but they had lots of good food. His mom fed a lot of people, and created a kind of communal space, right? Like we talked about before, at the table, because people would come in and be so tired and they'd all share that wonderful food together and they'd leave laughing. Remember that part? So it created an opportunity for fellowship, didn't it? And we'll remember that. You know, you remember these things when you grow up. Things that happen when you're a child, you remember them later. So you can imagine Will was probably very healthy because he had lots of good food and he was working hard and he became, well, it doesn't really tell you. It just tells you it ended up going to Belgium, another country, to play basketball. So do you think he was strong? Probably really strong. Do you think he was healthy? Probably really healthy, because if you have to play basketball professionally, you better be strong and healthy, right? And so that sort of inferred that to be a great athlete, you have to take care of yourself, take care of your body and your mind, right? So then when he was playing basketball, he discovered that he kind of liked working in the soil, kind of liked gardening, right? With a friend, and they had a garden, he and his wife Cindy, and they fed the basketball team for Thanksgiving. Oh, he's already wanting to go back to the farm, sort of, isn't he? Well, later it said when he quit playing basketball, he got a job. It said it was a white shirt job. Now, that suggests something, but what do you think it means if you have a white shirt job? It was different from basketball, right? What kind of job would that be?
I had some white shirt jobs.
What do you think, Mr. Larry? What were your white shirt
Well,
jobs?
one of the white shirt jobs I had, what a white job shirt means is you mean
A white
wear
shirt
a dress
job?
shirt. It could be white, but it's a dress shirt and it's a tie. You might have a sport coat or a suit with it, so it's kind of formal. And so I had a white shirt job with uh, Oreo cookies. I sold Oreo cookies and other things by Nabisco. And then when I was in undergraduate school, I worked in a fine men's clothing store. So I had to wear a shirt and a tie. Sometimes it was a white shirt and a sport coat or a suit coat. And I worked for the juvenile court. I was a probation officer. And so I had to make appearances in court. And so I had to dress up for court appearances. And I worked at the medical center. And so I wore a suit and a tie to work every day in my office. So those are some examples.
Yeah, Mr. Larry became a doctor too. Sometimes it's a journey along the way, right? You keep studying and discovering what you want to learn, and sometimes it's a long journey. Yeah. So, but Will's journey is very interesting because he did he worked with his white shirt job. We don't know what it was, but I guess it could be an accountant, it could be somebody working with computers, it could be probably something where you have to get a little bit dressed up and that you might be sitting more, right? Who knows?
Like
But
a manager in an office.
right, a manager in an office, um, lots of different possibilities. But it wasn't playing basketball, was it? Then later in the story, they talked about when he was in the garden, he always wore blue jeans and a cut off sweatshirt, right? So that told you he was doing a different kind of work. And he just began to love to work back with the soil. But he was in the city, right? And so there wasn't a big farm, there wasn't land in the same way. And he had some problems to solve. How are you going to work in the dirt when you're in the city? First of all, he found the abandoned land with the greenhouses, right? But the soil wasn't good. It was polluted. It was just bad. And so you wouldn't want to grow anything in that, right? So he had to figure out a way to make good soil. And that's when he discovered, well, that's when he used the red wigglers, those worms, right? And at first, he didn't know exactly what those worms would want to eat because they had made a compost pile. He'd learned how to do that, I think, in Belgium. And you just take lots of scraps. You all remember that, reading about that, I'm sure. But certain things worked for those worms to make good soil, certain food for the worms, and certain things didn't. So what do you all think? Do you remember, yeah, how about onions and garlic? Would that be good food for the red wigglers? Would they make soil from that, chewing on that?
No, I don't think
I
so.
don't think so. It seemed like things like hot pepper and garlic and onions they didn't like. But those red wigglers liked watermelon rinds, right? And sweet potato. They like things kind of sweet. Sweet potato scraps and molasses. So,
I remember at the public greens garden, they have wigglers in the ground there, and they have a compost pile, and they feed the wigglers and grow food from that garden for the restaurant and for the city and for children in schools.
right. Remember that? Public Greens, that's where we were the last time we were with you. So I think that Martha Hoover was probably inspired by Will Allen. A lot of people have been inspired by him. In fact, our hospital, Eskenazi Hospital, has a garden on the roof. And I think they may have been inspired by Will Allen. Well, let's see what else
It's called
happened
the
with
Sky Farm.
right, the Sky Farm. Isn't that cool? So he found a way to grow all kinds of food in those greenhouses by making layers like a vertical space, right? He crowded the shelves with all kinds of plants. So it wasn't just the ground below, but it was all the shelves, and you could go up inside. Um, he did use those hoop houses. You know, we saw those at Public Greens too. Remember when Mr. Larry, he was on the camera. That's Mr. Larry was there at Public Greens, even though you never saw him. But his camera focused in on those hoops that were covered with plastic, and we could sort of see the little green
Looked like a
plants.
caterpillar on the ground,
Right. Sort of
a
see
white one.
the greens in there. Well, that's what Will Allen did too. So he had that on the ground, and then he could grow long rows of vegetables. And whether it was hot or cold, he could still keep growing. Um, and then he had vats of water and fish. Oh my goodness, that was fascinating. And he could see how they worked together, right? The fish, the water, and the sprouts. So that was a little handy community, the way the sprouts would clean the water for the fish and the fish would grow the sprouts. They were all connected, weren't they? That was kind of like a little community of support. And he had goats and chickens and turkeys and bees, just like we saw at Public Greens. Remember when Mr. Larry focused on the sign that said always bee friendly? So they have bees there at Public Greens as well. So all the growing power of that community was so special, wasn't it? He had teenagers and kids and parents and everybody working together so that he eventually grew enough food for several supermarkets. Oh my goodness, that's pretty amazing to do that in the middle of the city. And so the people that lived there in the high rises could come and get food, and then they could also sell it to restaurants, right? And remember, Public Greens is a restaurant also. Um, well, that whole idea about how to create good soil with those worms, those red wigglers, began to be very important. And he traveled back and forth across the United States and around the world to Kenya and London and all over the world. So now, today, visitors come to Milwaukee, right? Like 20,000 visitors to see how to start a farm and get an idea how to use land that's not the normal farmland. All people can really be a farmer, right? Everyone can. And I hope you all get inspired to do some growing. Now there is a program in Indianapolis called Big Green where you get a chance to be learning about how to grow. And we hope to get a visitor here to share the work that he does there. And we will see if he could come and join us and tell us more about that. All right? So we'll see you in just a little bit. All righty. Bye-bye.